I commend you for braving the storm and coming. You are the, as Joanne says, you are the men, sheep, wheat. So you made it. It's such a nice turnout for such bad weather, and I would think that it was because Debbie's your boss if I hadn't been your boss.
No, surely not.
So I do think this is a very timely topic. I know we're all getting ready to make exams, and having a refresher and good information about how that should be done is, I think, it's going to really help us. So I would like to thank Debbie so much for putting this on her agenda. I know that she's busy this time of year, and so I'm very especially appreciative of her taking the time to do this preparation and come and make this presentation. So thank you so much, Debbie.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you all for being here. I'm really delighted that you joined me. A couple disclaimers. First of all, I'm really not an expert in test construction. I teach how to do it to elementary students, or students preparing to be elementary teachers. So that's going to be my slant. It's a very basic presentation, but with resources that will help take you farther. And so hopefully you'll get something out of this. I like for you to participate though, because I know you have some examples to share that will really help others in the group. So please share your ideas and your thoughts about test construction as we go through this presentation. So I'd like to start with some of the purposes of teacher-made tests. And of course, we're talking about test construction, so that's a teacher-made test, as opposed to one that you pull from like a teacher's manual kind of thing. Besides assigning grades, okay, I like to go beyond that. We really want to know what our students are learning. Okay, that's really, really important to me. We want to know what our students have learned, and how much they know and how much they have gained, how much knowledge they have gained. That's really, really important to teaching, and that informs your teaching. If you know what your students are learning and what they're still struggling with, that should help you know how to teach and what to teach. So the teaching and assessment cycle is really a continuous one that feeds into the other components. And of course, testing is to motivate and to reinforce learning. All right, some of our questions for today. When should you make your own test, or when should you just use the ones that are available to you? Let's talk about that for a minute. This is the main complaint I hear from students. Well, my teacher talked about all this great stuff in class, but then the test didn't reflect that at all. You heard that before? Okay, so it's really important to make those two things match, I think. If it's important enough for you to teach and talk about in class, you really need to assess it. Okay? And if it's not important enough to teach and address in class, you probably shouldn't assess it. Okay, that's my opinion. What problems have you encountered in testing, in designing tests, and what successes have you had? Anybody want to share any thoughts on these questions?
I have particular trouble
Yes.
with I think the content area, mathematics would be different, for example, from
Sure.
theology
Or language.
So I have trouble preparing multiple choice tests that are appropriate in terms of options and ideas.
Okay.
I really don't know what I'm testing for at that point, because they could guess maybe 2 out of the 3
Okay.
or 4.
All right. So we'll talk about multiple choice questions and how to make that a good format.
Actually, Debbie, this past semester, I started a little bit last semester, but I really started intentionally this semester. But I do somewhat of an item analysis now
Yes.
on each of my tests, especially multiple choice and short answer. And this way it gives me a glimpse or a picture of what my students are getting wrong.
Good.
And then they know that that's going to be back on part of the comprehensive part of their exam
Excellent.
at the end of the semester.
That's a great practice, and we're going to briefly touch on that too. Item analysis. How do you know if your test is effective? Yeah, very good. Anybody else?
I was just going to say, this is my department chair.
Yes, and I've been here 8 years and I'm just now figuring this out.
Another issue I have
Yes.
is, I don't know if it relates to what you're going to do today,
Uh-huh.
is how much do you help students prep for a test?
Okay.
And how do you help them prep for a test?
Okay.
Do you give them study guides, do you not give them study guides? You hold out-of-class sessions like in the evening for those that can show up.
Okay.
So one of the problems I encounter is students saying, like what you just hinted at, I didn't know that was going to be on the test. And as the late great John Bowden said, it comes out of my mouth, it's important. How do you help students
Yeah.
understand?
Well, I think, yes, you emphasize that point. If we talk about it in class, it's important and you need to know about it. I like to give study guides, but they're not very detailed, just the broad categories or topics to review, and then I tell them how to review. I'm getting ready to give a final exam in tested measurements, and so I tell them to review the chapters, especially the summaries at the end of the chapters, review all the PowerPoints, and look at least the headings in the chapters again. So I give them specific tips like that for
Are
testing.
your PowerPoints up on Google?
Yes, they are.
Do you think that that's a positive thing?
I think so.
Okay.
How do you keep the attention of students in class then?
Yeah.
We have some problem, I
Okay.
think, in religion core classes especially.
Ah, okay.
If we put up our things on Moodle,
Uh-huh.
then the student seems rather listless during the class.
Okay, well, I don't put them up until after the class, for one thing. But I know, and I do encourage them to look afterwards to review. I don't have long PowerPoints. I like to break it up, short PowerPoint presentations with activities that reinforce what the PowerPoint has addressed.
I think our problem is we put too much information on our PowerPoint.
I think you're right.
And that just kind of
I think
adds
you're
to
right.
the
You see, mine are very basic.
That's
Vanessa?
what I was gonna say, Dr. Frost. My PowerPoints are an outline. There's no way that a student can, and I post mine on Moodle, I post them in advance. There's no way that they can sit in my class and take just the PowerPoints and pass my test. If they're not engaged, they do print the PowerPoints and then they fill in. This is the main, and then, okay, we talk about this, and then they take notes and fill that in. If you don't come to my class, that PowerPoint's really not gonna be any good. And if you're getting notes from a friend, you better hope that they were awake. And, so, that's my PowerPoint. And all I don't like PowerPoints for students, that reason, it's like they depend on them, but I've just really reinforced to my students, if you depend on this, you will not be successful, you do have to put more into it. So, keeping them engaged, again, that's a talent, everything else.
That's right, that's right, very important. And also you see in some of my PowerPoints, not this one today, it might say, see example on page, whatever in the book. So I'm encouraging them not only to read the PowerPoints, but to connect it to the book and what the book says. Okay, what are your favorite test items to take and to administer? Who likes true false? Nobody? Okay, a couple true false. How about multiple choice? It's a very popular test item. Short answer or fill in the blank. Okay, a lot of those. Essay? Listing, yes, okay. Essay? A lot of people like that. Okay, what did I leave out? Matching? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about these. And I'm interested to know your favorite test item to take. Is it the same as what you like to administer? Just curious.
Interesting.
Just
It's
curious.
what I like to administer, but not what I like to grade. I like
Right.
the essay, but I hate grading.
Yes, yes.
Dang it, sis.
Takes a little time.
I like multiple choice, I like to give it and take it, that's the best for me.
Multiple choice.
You know, the critical thinking with the scenario.
Yes,
I mean,
yes, yes.
it's not, it's a different sound, and you have to process.
Definitely.
Pick between the choices.
that gets you a little bit higher level thinking with multiple choice. That's good. So today, some general, very general construction tips for those types of test items, and the pluses and minuses, advantages and disadvantages of each. We won't get much into scoring except for essays. We'll touch on that. And then interpretation or analysis, item analysis a little bit. But first, one story. Okay, this is my story from first grade and my first remembrance of my first test. Firstborn, very serious, very focused, want to do it right. And the teacher, this is in Nashville, Tennessee, the teacher's instructions are draw a line under the correct answer. So I'm working just, diligently trying to finish my test, about 5 questions, and I look around and everybody's finished except me. So I sort of peek over to my neighbor's paper and I see I misunderstood the directions. So this was my response.
Oh, no.
I'm drawing a lion under the correct answer for all 5. So, yeah, well, probably looked a little more like that. But that taught me a lesson in test administration, especially directions. Make sure your directions are very clear, both written and oral, especially for first graders. Okay. Has anybody heard of or used a table of specifications when you're developing a test? Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that and just show you a couple of examples. That's another helpful tool in helping you construct a test. And we'll talk a little bit about some formatting issues. So this is an example of a table of specifications. Basically, it's a blueprint for your test. This one's more complicated than probably I would use, but it's a 6th grade, middle grades table of specifications for a social studies unit. And so there were 5 days in the unit. The instructional objectives are listed, along with the amount of time spent on each of those. I'm not suggesting you go into this much detail. I'll show you a simpler version in a minute. Percent of time on the topic, number of test items that should address that proportionately, and the type of test item. Is it a lower level or is it a higher level? Okay, this is another way to address this table of specifications. You see the content outline on the left side. Those are the major topics. And then what I want to do with this table is to look at the level of questioning addressing each of these. So am I just requiring lower level thinking, just memorization, repetition, or am I stretching my students and including some higher levels of thinking on the test? That's another way to use a table of specifications.
What do the numbers represent?
Number of items. So there are 8 items for the history of adolescence. Most of them are lower level. 60 total items, and you can see at the bottom the breakdown according to Bloom's taxonomy. So what I would recommend, try this. If you're, especially if you're developing new final exam or midterm exam, a really important test, look at your major objectives. You might use your course objectives, your course behavioral objectives. You might have more specific objectives than those. And look at the amount of emphasis you put in teaching those. Did you emphasize some of those topics more than others? That should probably be reflected then in the exam. Okay, so I'm not going to develop a test and half of the emphasis is on something that we barely addressed or something that's not as important as the other components or the other objectives. So it's a way to kind of cross-check what I taught, what are the important objectives, and how am I testing those? How many items, and at what level of thinking. Okay, any questions about a table of specification? You can design these in several different ways, and some of the resources have some more examples that'll.
Designing way where you're building, what's content that builds on, like mathematics, where the content builds on previous taught. How do you, is there different?
I don't think so. I think that would be reflected in the objectives. You're just assuming.
As they are built?
Yeah.
So the specific components that are.
Right. All right, now we'll look at some of the different item types, a few simple examples, and some advantages and disadvantages. This is the short answer or completion. So who was the first president of the U.S., or the first president of the U.S. was blank. Short answer completion, they're really easy to construct. And students supply the answer, so they're not choosing from multiple choice, so you know what they know by their response. It's hard to measure complex thinking, higher levels of thinking with this type of item. And some suggestions for this format: be very specific in your statement or your question, and keep the answer blanks the same length. Okay? Otherwise, you're giving them cues, or if you have a double blank, shorter blanks, longer blanks, you're giving them clues. And if that's the case, you might be testing savvy test takers instead of if they know. And that's the point for me. When I'm testing students, I want to know what they know. I don't want to try to trick them. I don't want to try to confuse them in the test. I want to know. So that's why it's really important to keep the test as clear as possible and without cues. And don't overuse it. Don't use too many blanks. This is a mistake I made when I was a new teacher. I have this one federal definition of a disability, and about every 3 words I made a blank. And you know, it's a long passage, and I saw when grading those that was a bad mistake. Basically, it let me know if they memorized the definition, which is okay, but probably not worthy of a test item. Okay, true, false. TF, yes, no, plus, minus, whatever your response is. And I really like true, false, correcting the false statements. Okay, true, false is a flip of the coin if they don't know it. So you don't know if they really know the answer or if they were lucky. But if they are required to correct all the false statements, that lets you know whether they were guessing or not.
Martin Longly used that. He called it agree, disagree. And they had to strike through the part that.
Yes, I really strongly recommend this format if you like true, false. Okay, an advantage of true, false, they're easy to construct, and you can cover a lot of material with true, false questions or items.
Do you ever go back and, like, when you have them correct the false, the statement, do you ever go back and give them credit for then correcting that? Or how do you, like, give them partial credit?
If they don't correct it, then they don't.
Right.
I mean, if they say it's false but don't correct it, they don't get credit. They have to correct it in order to get the full credit. Sometimes I've given partial credit, you know, but I would say yes or no.
Do you think that type of true false would change this plus minus, and how would it change this plus minus?
The advantages and disadvantages?
I mean, I still think that they're relatively easy to construct because it's a true-false statement.
Right.
It's just the monkey's on the student.
Sure.
Part that's wrong.
Uh-huh.
But it would seem to raise the level of Bloom's taxonomy
Yes.
because they're having to deal with
Yes.
some thinking through.
Absolutely. And it would take away the 50-50 chance.
Yeah.
And it would increase the reliability. Yeah, so good point, very good point.
You know what, the students, I did this, and I had the Thai word for monkey is ling. And so I said, correct it. Listening is not the Thai word. I
Okay,
mean, was, but they would just say, this is not what
so I may not give full credit for that one. Okay. Just the straight true false without correcting the false, then these are the negatives. Low level blooms, 50-50 chance, reliability is low because of that, and they're not good to diagnose learning because you don't know if they're guessing. So you don't see where the problems are in their learning. Suggestions for true false, be very specific with your statements. Be very clear and concise as possible. Don't use a lot of extra words. Don't ask trivia and don't ask opinion unless you say opinion. This is this particular author's opinion, for example. Don't get too complex. Keep the ideas separate. In other words, you have a compound sentence. You know, do they both have to be true, or can one be true and one be false, one side be false? So keep one idea per item. I mentioned opinion. True statements are normally longer. That's a test-taking strategy, so watch out for that if you don't want to give cues to your students. I've noticed that on my tests, really, because you're trying to make a point. This is a true statement. I want them to remember that. So it's long and detailed, but it shouldn't be. Equal emphasis, so about as many true as false. Can be slightly different, but not overwhelmingly one way or the other. Okay, then matching, the imperfect match. What that means is the questions you ask, or I forget what the right term is, on the left-hand side, and then the options or the choices, you should have more so that it's not the match, not the same 5 here and 5 here. Okay, because if they know most of them, they can, figure out which ones they don't know by a process of elimination. And again, you want to know what they know and what they don't know. There it is. Responses and premises. And the long and short, the long items or the premises should be longer and on the left side, and the shorter but longer list. Shorter responses should be on the right. You'll see some examples. Advantages and disadvantages of matching. Compact, maybe can cover a lot of material with ease. I would say yes. Easy to make. And then the disadvantages, it does tend to focus on lower levels of learning, rote learning. And a disadvantage is finding sometimes a homogeneous material. Okay, so what does that mean? That means, you'll see an example of this in a minute. I don't mix in for my responses dates, people, so homogeneous. If I'm looking, it might be all dates or all presidents or all of one category. Otherwise, they can figure out this is supposed to be a date. This is supposed to be a person. This is a place. Okay, that's what we mean by homogeneous material. Suggestions for matching, make sure the material is homogeneous. State if they can choose a response once, more than once. If they can leave any out, that should be in the instructions. Choose all that apply. What's the deal? Just make sure that's clear. Shorter to the right. We'll figure it out. Logical order of responses, if it doesn't give it away. For example, if I'm looking at dates, the response should be a date. My responses should be in chronological order. Okay, just makes it easier to process. That's not a cue. That's not a cue. It's just easier to process something if it's chronological or if it's alphabetical, some logical sequence to the response. Make sure the directions are clear and put them all on one page. You don't have matching and then some of the items are on the next page. Make sure they fit on one page. Okay, then multiple choice. All right, these are the labels. The STEM is the statement or the question. And then there's one right answer. and the others are alternatives or distractors or decoys or foils. The distractors or the alternatives should be feasible. You don't, and you'll see this sometimes. You'll throw one in there just for fun. That's okay if it's maybe one item, one question or something like that, but they should all be feasible alternatives so that, again, you know if they know what the right answer is. Advantages for multiple choice. The student can't get credit for knowing that something is wrong. You see the students mark out the ones, the alternatives that they know is not the right answer. But that doesn't matter if they're down to 2 left and they choose between the 2 and they choose the wrong one. They don't get credit. Higher reliability. Homogeneous material isn't necessary. And a disadvantage is hard to diagnose problems just looking at responses to true false. Multiple choice questions. Limited by verbal ability. Your students who are good verbally will tend to do better on multiple choice items. It's very heavily focused on language. I'm sorry.
You said verbal, students that have been verbally do better on this. What do we do with international students who may not be, it's up here, but
Okay.
they just can't
Okay.
verbalize? Is there a better testing method?
Could be. What I would do, I'm an old special ed teacher, so I've given modified tests to some students. I've talked to students after the test to question them further to see if they really did know more than the test reflected. So those kinds of
What
things.
do you do if you found that to be the case? I had a student, two different students. One was foreign, and one I just felt like she knew more.
Yeah.
And both of them, I had them out, and when I would, and especially for the foreign student, sort of maybe stating the exact same question in a different way, or emphasizing it with my tone, or speaking slowly. And if he didn't understand, he could ask me, and he clearly knew way more than his exam grade.
That's up to the teacher, but I would give them extra points if they demonstrated to me that they understood and they knew the material. That's my personal approach.
And I appreciate every bit of that. With nursing, though, we prepare them for a licensure exam, and it is given in a multiple choice format. There are no exceptions, and that's how it's presented. So the convenience of let me talk to you and see if you know it, that's great. But if I'm preparing someone for that licensure exam, I don't have that flexibility, to pass them. I'd be doing them a disservice if I passed them all through college, and then when they got to that licensure exam, they were unable to pass that. So I appreciate, and I say that because I know Pamela teaches anatomy and physiology for us. And so just her being aware of how we test in preparation for our practice is very useful for us to work together. And that type of testing, because I'm sure I've had international students that I'm sure they know more than they're able to show me on a test, but that's not going to get them the nursing license.
So in that case, if you have talented, bright international students and you want them to be successful, then I'm not saying that the instructors have to do this, but some resource on campus, maybe academic support, would work with the students in learning how to process multiple choice items and might work in conjunction with the teachers. Okay, you're going to give them X number of extra minutes for this semester. Next semester we'll cut back. So you're working toward that goal of passing that license exam, but you're giving them the supports to get there and not just saying you can't, they can't take these tests. So let's just forget it.
And it's difficult because, we're running into that problem.
Yeah, sure.
We're reaching out to
Yeah,
for a
yes, yes. That's a good resource.
go ahead.
What is your thought on our students aren't readers?
Uh-huh.
And so now I'm thinking we're going to do reading quizzes. And so we're going to give 6 reading quizzes over the course of the semester, and we're going to drop the 2 lowest grades. What do you think about that strategy?
As long, yeah, I would make that clear to the students.
Oh, yes.
One of the objectives is to improve your reading.
Yes, yes.
And so I'm going to give multiple exams, and I want to see growth. I want to see improvement. I expect to drop those first 2 because I want to see you grow.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other
Sorry?
type of test that we give in nursing is select all that apply, and
Yes,
it's not an
yes.
option that we have because it's gonna wind up on their, NCLEX.
Uh-huh.
And that's not something I think that most disciplines give,
Uh-huh.
but they have to be able to tell us, 2 or
Yes.
3 or 4 out of
Sure,
the ones that are there.
Sure.
So they have to learn how to do that type of testing as well, which is difficult.
it is. Yeah, so you keep that goal in mind of passing that license exam, and how do you get them ready to take it? Not just the content, but in test-taking strategies. That's another important part of their learning process. Multiple choice doesn't do problem-solving skills well, and can you find enough good distractors, feasible responses that are not correct? Sometimes that's hard, depending on the material. Yes?
On those, is it okay to go with A and E but not F, and A, B and D but not G, and that?
I think that's so confusing. It's hard for me to follow, but maybe your students can.
But it's okay to do all of the above or none of the above?
It can, but it's okay, but sparingly.
They did that on my nursing exam, I hated it, killed me, but I
Yeah,
passed.
yeah.
I was passed.
And that's one thing I was thinking about Terry's question as well, is that you can use a multiple choice question to get at higher order
Yes, you
thinking.
can.
By offering that, but again, a smaller portion of questions to ask them, choose all that apply, or, is it, it could be one more or none. And again, that could be used in order to find that, but again,
Yeah.
that also takes a lot more time
It
for a
does.
student to process through.
It does.
That means it's going to impact the length of your
Yeah.
other items on your test
Right,
in order
right.
to give them.
And if you think that's an important format to use, I would say work with your students in class to get them ready for that type of item.
I would recommend
Yes.
giving, like a sample test.
That's
With that
good.
format
That's
in
good.
it, so that they know, they aren't just dealing with test format issues, they're dealing with content issues when they take the test.
That's right. Yeah, because they're facing new teachers most every semester with new approaches to testing, new styles, so it's a lot for students to process. Okay, just a few suggestions for multiple choice. The STEM is really important. The STEM should be very clear, meaningful, and then the alternatives should be shorter and to the point. We'll see some examples. Try not to use a negative in the STEM. If you do, highlight it, make it bold. Which of the following is not true, whatever, then make sure the not is all caps and in bold. Make sure there's only one clear answer. Although like I said, the other alternatives should be feasible. But if a student knows the material, they know this is the answer. Don't make the STEM too long, and the alternative options should be grammatically consistent. Otherwise, you're giving them a clue. If this is something A, and the option should be and something, so you're giving clues if that doesn't match. Keep the lengths of alternatives consistent with the question. Okay, look at your responses, A, B, C, D. I just returned a test construction assignment from my class, and one of the students made a test, and for the multiple choice section, it was like A, B, 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 D. So, I mean, that's okay, I guess, but I would suggest that you mix it up a little more And definitely don't go with patterns. Don't go ABC, ABC, ABC. And that's of course appropriate for true false as well. True false, true false, true false. I'm telling you, we have some savvy test takers. Be careful with none of the above, all of the above. And most sources say use that sparingly. And don't force your material into multiple choice if it can be easily assessed through one of the other formats. Okay, choose the better item. I'm going to show you two different questions or items, and you tell me which one is better based on what we just learned. For completion, the blank is the most frequently used score to report averages, or the most frequently used score to report averages is the blank. One or two? Two. And why? The blank is close to the end of the sentence. This is an interesting one. Okay. Think about this one. The name of the capital city of Illinois is blank, or the capital of Illinois is blank. Ooh. If I were a creative student, how many options could I put in number two? Beautiful. My hometown. Okay. Blank carries blood back to the blank, or blood is carried back to the heart by the blank. Two. All right. Multiple choice. Which year was the Individuals with Disabilities Act enacted into law? You've got options. Same question or same stem. Two, and why? Chronological order. Yeah. So you see how much easier that is to process. You're not giving it away. I mean, they have to know what the date is to respond correctly, but that helps to organize their thinking. Okay, matching. So this is the short and the long. Match the states in column A to their capitals in column B. So I've got 5 premises and 7 responses. Okay, just a word about essays, essay items. If you can measure the material with another format, do it, because it's usually easier. And especially if you have large classes, you know how much time it takes to grade essay items. So if you can truly measure what you're looking for with a multiple choice or a fill in the blank, do it that way. If not, I mean, there's definite benefits to using essay questions or items. This says they aren't reliable, but I think they can be. They can be. They take a long time to grade, and sometimes they're limited in scope. But I think you can design a well-constructed essay question, and it can suit. It can fit the bill. It can meet your needs. Yes.
From the English perspective, we would have the same complaint about that as Vanessa did about, we're teaching them to write.
That's right.
And so you're testing their writing ability.
Exactly. So essay is very appropriate for writing. Let's see.
Hopefully teaching them to think through writing.
Definitely. So that's very appropriate. Yep.
We get paid extra.
Let's see if we have any tips. Okay, suggestions. Suggestions for grading essays. Make an outline of the answer and the specific points. Don't just read and say, oh, that sounds pretty good. I mean, what are you looking for? Are there specific points that they must say in order to get full credit? Or do they get X number of points for making this, addressing this point, and so forth? Be very clear, almost like a rubric. And some use rubrics to grade essays. Decide how to handle irrelevant factors. Some actually take points away from, because students are trying to, they're throwing everything at you. hoping that something will be right, something will stick, right? So you have to make that decision. How do you handle irrelevant information? Do all the questions at one time. Okay, so if I'm grading a class of 30 and I have 5 essay questions, I'm going to read question 1 for everybody before I go on to question 2. Really helps you keep consistency. Really helps for reliability in the results. Yeah, so I'm comparing all the responses to number 1 before I go on to number 2. Don't look at the students' names. Sometimes that helps. I mean, we do have sometimes unintended biases or preconceived notions. This student is so smart. She knows this. She knows this. So you've got to read what's on the paper.
Never would have done that 15 years ago.
Yeah. You find things that work for you. For me, another thing that works in grading essays especially is trying to, for consistency, for my consistency's sake, try not to grade them like into the middle of the night or, you know, because I sometimes find myself being harder on students when I'm not feeling so great. I really have to watch that. Okay, advantages of essays. Can measure complex outcomes, higher levels of thinking, definitely. You can measure writing ability and skills. Integrates higher level thinking. Are they easy to write? I think if you know what if you match your standards or your objectives and you make it very clear what you're asking, I think they can be easy to write. And it really does add to student learning. They need the experience of writing more and more. So. Unreliability of scoring, so that's the thing that I have to fight against. Make sure that I treat each response fairly and consistently. Time, of course, takes a lot of time. And a limited sampling of content. It's hard to have a full, for most of us, it's hard to have a full test of essay questions. So you've got to, like I said, if you can test some of the knowledge in other ways, do it, and just have a section of essay. Okay, just a few words about test format. I know we're getting really close. The like items should be grouped together. So you've got a section of true false, a section of multiple choice, and so on and so on. And within each of those sections, go from the easier items to the more complex items. Okay? I want students to develop some confidence when they first get started. I don't want to hit them with the zinger, number 1. So I want them to, build up their confidence and to do well and sometimes if they answer 2 or 3 easier items, they're ready for that zinger. Be very clear in the formatting, on the page. Make sure the directions are clear. Okay, just real quick, we won't have time to get much into this, but analyzing how your students do, or you're really assessing your test when you do item analysis. Like Mike says, do you just do a simple how many people got number 1 correct, number 2, or you do a more advanced version?
At this point in time, I'm just doing how many got a particular question right or wrong, and then it goes into a little more detail on multiple choice.
Good, yes.
How many had the right answer, but what other answers?
Good.
Which other foils did they?
Yes, yes.
Because then it can help me understand where the mistake is.
Absolutely. The easiest thing is just to look and see how many missed number 1, how many missed number 2. What will it tell you if everybody missed an item? Either it wasn't clear or you didn't teach it. Okay? On the other hand, if everybody got an item correct, is that appropriate? Only you can decide that for your class and what the content is. Difficulty index, discrimination of the items, effectiveness of alternatives. Let's just look at, this is I think what Mike was talking about. This is for item 1, and there are alternatives A through E. I'm looking at my batch of 30 tests, and I'm going to take the top 10 and the bottom 10 and compare how they do. So is my test, is that item a good discriminator? Okay. And are the foils or the distractors good? So you can see on this particular item, B is the correct response, 6 out of the top 10 group got that correct, and only 2 from the lower group. So that looks like a pretty good discriminator to me. But you can also see nobody chose E. So I'm going to look at E and rewrite that response, that option. Okay, and then these are some resources. I particularly like the first one. This is from Cornell University. It's got a lot of great information, more examples of test items, more complex than the ones that I shared with you today. I really encourage you to look at, especially the first resource. And I'll be glad to send this to all of you. Okay. Final questions? Great. Well, thank you very much. Been a fun group.